Julian believed throwing divorce papers across the marble table was his ticket to freedom. He stood there smirking with his mistress, convinced he was shedding a dead weight to ascend into high society. He had no idea that every dime of his wealth and every ounce of his reputation sat squarely in the palm of my hand. As I picked up the pen to sign, my 9-figure fortune began crushing his empire. He is about to learn exactly how expensive betrayal can be. My name is Serafina, and for the last 7 years, I thought that was enough. But as the heavy manila envelope slammed onto the cold Italian marble of our coffee table, I realized that to the man standing before me, I was nothing more than a line item he was desperate to erase. The sound echoed through the vast, open living room of our Malibu beachfront villa, a sharp crack that silenced the rhythmic crashing of the waves outside. Julian stood over me, his silhouette framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked every inch the tech mogul he had recently become, wearing a suit that cost more than my father's first car. But he was not alone. Clinging to his arm like a decorative accessory was Bella, a 22-year-old model who was currently gracing the covers of half the fashion magazines in the city. She looked down at me with a smirk that was as sharp as the diamond sparkling on her finger. "I am done waiting." "Serafina," Julian said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I have found true love. A partner who actually understands the world I live in now. Bella is everything you are not." Bella giggled, a hollow sound that grated on my nerves. She scanned me from head to toe, her nose wrinkling in exaggerated disgust. "Oh, Jules, look at her," Bella said, leaning into him. "She is such a boring housewife. And that dress. Did you get it at a supermarket discount bin? It is practically tragic. I would not let my maid wear that to clean the bathroom." I looked down at my simple cotton dress. It was comfortable and practical. 2 words that had no place in their world. I remained seated, my hands resting quietly in my lap, feeling the coldness of the leather chair seep through my clothes. Julian tapped his watch impatiently. "I am being generous, Sarah. Listen closely because I am only saying this once. You get the old apartment in the city, the one we lived in before the money, and I will wire $50,000 to your account. Take it and disappear from my life." He walked around the table, his chest puffed out. "Thorne Dynamics just went public this morning. Do you understand what that means? I am a millionaire now, a multi-millionaire. I am the face of the future. And I cannot have a frumpy, uneducated woman like you standing next to me in photos. You are simply obsolete." I sat in silence, my fingers curling tightly into the fabric of my skirt until my knuckles turned white. My mind flashed back to the garage. I remembered the smell of stale coffee and solder. I remembered ironing his only button-down shirt at 5 in the morning so he would look presentable for investors. I remembered eating instant noodles for dinner so we could afford to pay the server hosting fees for his beta app. He had forgotten all of it. "Come on, sign it," Julian snapped, pointing a gold pen at the document. "Bella and I are hosting our engagement party next week on the new yacht. I want this done before then so the press release is clean." Bella took a step forward, holding a glass of expensive red wine. She looked at the pristine white rug beneath my feet, an antique silk rug I had spent months sourcing because I loved the craftsmanship. With a feigned slip, she tilted her wrist. The dark crimson liquid splashed across the white fibers, staining them instantly. "Oops," Bella said, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Clumsy me. Well, it was an ugly rug anyway. Now it has a little color. Consider it my mark on this place." The disrespect was physical. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Something inside me, a wall I had built to protect myself from his growing indifference over the years, finally crumbled. But what rose from the rubble was not tears. It was ice. I slowly lifted my head. The hurt that had been swirling in my chest settled into a cold, hard pit in my stomach. I looked past the ruined rug, past the sneering mistress, and locked eyes with the man I had vowed to love forever. "Julian," I said softly, my voice steady. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Julian let out a short, barking laugh. He looked at Bella, then back at me with pure contempt. "Positive," he sneered. "You are the biggest burden of my life. Serafina, I am cutting the dead weight. Now sign." I looked at him for 1 second longer, memorizing the cruelty on his face. Then I picked up the pen. "Okay," I whispered. I signed my name with a flourish, accepting the $50,000 and the old apartment. I accepted his terms, and in doing so, I sealed his fate. The rain began to fall the moment my battered sedan cleared the iron gates of the estate, heavy drops hammering against the roof like a drum roll for the end of my marriage. I, Serafina Sterling, gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, the rhythmic swish of the wipers cutting through the blur of water and tears. But beneath the chaos of the storm, a cold, hard resolve was beginning to crystallize in my chest. Julian saw a broken woman driving away in a car that struggled to hit 60 miles per hour. What he did not see was the predator finally shedding its camouflage. My mind drifted back 7 years, to the day we met. I was not wearing designer silk then, either. I was working in a dusty university library, wearing oversized glasses and a thrift store sweater, pretending to be a struggling student drowning in student loans. It was a necessary lie. I had learned the hard way that when people knew my last name, they stopped seeing me and started seeing a bank account. I had been betrayed before, my heart broken by men who calculated their affection based on my net worth. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I could buy. Julian never knew the truth. He never knew that the quiet, supportive wife who clipped coupons and cooked his dinner was actually the sole heir to Sterling legacy. He bragged about his new status as a millionaire, puffing his chest out over a valuation of $20 million. He had no idea that my personal net worth was $400 million. I was worth 20 times everything he had ever touched. Sterling Legacy was not just a company, it was an empire. We owned the ground beneath the most expensive skyscrapers in North America. We held the industrial patents that made modern manufacturing possible. We were the silent giants of the investment world, moving mountains without ever making a sound. And for 7 years, I had used that power to prop him up. As I navigated the wet highway, a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Julian walked around believing he was a self-made genius, a titan of industry who had conquered the market with sheer grit. The reality was pathetic. I had utilized a complex network of shell companies to inject capital into Thorne Dynamics whenever it was on the brink of collapse, when he needed a big win to impress his board. I was the one who instructed my investment division to steer our VIP clients his way. 80% of his major contracts, the very deals he toasted to with Bella, were signed, only because I had quietly nodded my head from the shadows. I finally pulled the car to a stop in the private underground garage of a high-rise in central New York. This building did not appear on Julian's radar. To him, it was just another faceless tower. To me, it was home. I took the private elevator up to the penthouse, the doors opening to reveal a sprawling space of glass and steel that overlooked the city skyline. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights flicker below. The housewife was gone. The woman who stood there now was the chairwoman of the board. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed a number I had not used in a long time. "Marcus," I said the moment the line connected, my voice devoid of the softness Julian despised. "Activate Project Phoenix." On the other end of the line, Marcus Vance, the most feared shark in the legal world, let out a low, chilling laugh. "Finally," Marcus said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "I have been waiting a long time for this call. Ms. Sterling. It will be a pleasure to teach him. The lesson of a lifetime." The screen on my office wall was 60 inches of high-definition arrogance. Julian was broadcasting live from the deck of his new yacht, the champagne flowing like water as he toasted to his freedom. He looked tan and victorious, holding Bella close as she shoved a diamond the size of a quail egg toward the camera lens. To new beginnings, Julian shouted over the roar of the ocean and the sycophantic cheers of his guests. And to finally shedding the past that held me back, the comments section was scrolling too fast to read. But I caught enough of them. The tabloids had already spun the narrative. Julian was the visionary genius finally unchained. Bella was his youthful muse, and I was the bitter, fired housewife who had leached off his potential. They called me a parasite. They called me old news. I muted the sound with a click of a remote. The silence that filled my corner office on the 45th floor was heavy and dignified, a sharp contrast to the chaotic gluttony playing out on the screen. I turned my chair away from the window, where the city of New York lay spread out like a circuit board below me, and looked at Marcus Vance. He sat across from my desk, his expression grave as he slid a thick leather-bound folder toward me. "It is worse than we thought," Marcus said, tapping the cover. Or better, depending on how you look at it. Julian has been cooking the books at Thorne Dynamics for 18 months. But here is the real kicker. To fund this engagement party and the new lifestyle Bella demanded, he leveraged everything. I opened the file. The numbers were staggering. Julian had mortgaged his personal properties and put up his entire stock portfolio as collateral. He was betting everything on a single massive investment into a new ecotech development called the Green Horizon Initiative. He believed it was the future that would turn his millions into billions. A small, cold smile touched my lips. "He went all in on Green Horizon," I asked. "Hook, line, and sinker." Marcus confirmed. "He thinks it is an independent startup. He has no idea that Green Horizon is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Legacy. He effectively borrowed money from you to impress his mistress while putting his own company up as collateral. To you." It was almost too poetic. Julian was paying interest on his own destruction. "Shall I pull the plug now?" Marcus asked, his hand hovering over his phone. "We could foreclose on the debt by morning. The party would be over before the hangover sets in." "No," I said, closing the folder. "Not yet. If we crush him now, he will play the victim. He will say bad luck destroyed him. I want him to believe he is invincible. I want him to climb so high that when he falls, there is not a single person left to catch him." Suddenly, my personal cell phone, the old number I had kept active, buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed Julian's +1. I picked it up and pressed accept, saying nothing. "Hello, is this the housekeeper?" Bella's voice shrilled through the speaker, slurring slightly from too much vintage rosé. "Oh, wait, it is just Sarah. Listen, sweetie, Julian and I are going to be at the Met Gala next month. I just wanted to warn you. Do not even think about showing up outside to beg for money. We do not want your poverty stinking up our red carpet." I could hear Julian laughing in the background. "Is that her?" he shouted. "Tell her to use the 50,000 wisely." I felt a calm rage settle in my chest, replacing the last remnants of my patience. "Enjoy it, Bella," I said, my voice low and even, "because easy come, easy go." I ended the call before she could respond and looked up at Marcus. The mercy was gone. "Execute phase 1. I commanded. Cut the shadow privileges. Call the bank directors at First National and remind them who actually backs their liquidity. Tell them to review Julian's credit rating without the sterling guarantee and cancel the VIP supply chain contracts. Let us see how much of a genius he is when the world stops handing him everything on a silver platter." Marcus nodded, a shark sensing blood in the water. "Consider it done." It took exactly 7 days for the foundation of Julian's glass house to develop its first hairline fracture. From the comfort of my private office, I watched the chaos unfold through reports forwarded by Marcus. It started with a whisper but quickly escalated into a scream. Long-standing partners, men who had shaken Julian's hand for years only because I had vouched for him, suddenly began pulling out of contracts. They cited strategic realignment or market volatility, but the message was clear without Serafina Sterling in the shadows. Julian Thorne was a risk they were no longer willing to take. The first major blow came from First National Bank. They contacted Julian on a Tuesday morning to inform him that his request to extend his revolving credit line had been denied. Furthermore, due to the fluctuating value of his tech stocks, they required immediate additional collateral to secure his existing loans. While Julian was sweating through his expensive shirt in his office, Bella was facing her own reality check. She stormed into his office that evening, throwing a platinum credit card onto his desk. "Do you have any idea how humiliating today was?" Bella shrieked, her face flushed with indignation. "I was at the boutique on Fifth Avenue, trying to buy a limited edition handbag. When I handed them this card, it was declined. Declined. The cashier looked at me like I was some sort of beggar." Julian stood up, running a hand through his hair, which was already looking less perfectly coiffed than usual. "Babe, calm down," Julian said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It is just a banking glitch. The systems are probably updating because of the IPO. I will have my assistant fix it tomorrow." "You better," Bella snapped. "My friends were there." "Julian, I cannot be the laughingstock of the group." "You won't be," Julian promised, his voice rising with desperation. "Listen, this is all temporary. By the end of the month, I am signing the partnership with the Orion Group. That deal alone is worth $50 million. Once that ink is dry, you can buy the whole damn store." He was delusional. He spent the next 3 days trying to call the CEO of Orion, not realizing that Orion was a subsidiary of my holding company. Every time he called, my executive assistants gave him the same polite runaround the CEO was in meetings. The CEO was traveling. The CEO was unavailable. While Julian chased ghosts, I was stepping into the light. I attended high-profile charity galas under my own name, finally taking credit for the philanthropy I had done anonymously for years. Julian was too busy putting out fires to notice my face in the society pages. It was at one of these events that I met Liam. He was not a billionaire or a tech mogul. He was an architect with calloused hands and a smile that reached his eyes. We started talking about structural integrity in Gothic cathedrals, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. He didn't know I was a billionaire heiress. He just thought I was a woman starting over after a bad breakup. 2 days later, Liam asked me to dinner. He didn't take me to a Michelin star restaurant. He took me to a small, bustling diner in Brooklyn that smelled of frying onions and fresh coffee. "I know it is not much," Liam said, looking a bit nervous as he adjusted his silverware. "But they make the best cherry pie in the city. I thought maybe you would like something real." "Real is exactly what I need," I replied, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. As we walked out of the diner, laughing at a joke Liam had made, a sleek sports car screeched to a halt at the curb. The window rolled down to reveal Julian. He looked haggard, but his sneer was as sharp as ever. He looked from me to Liam, taking in Liam's flannel shirt and work boots. "Wow," Julian laughed, shaking his head. "I knew you would hit rock bottom, Sarah, but I didn't think it would happen this fast. You replaced a millionaire with a—" "What is he?" "A bricklayer." Liam stepped forward, his jaw tightening, but I placed a hand on his arm to stop him. "He builds things that last. Julian," I said calmly. "Something you wouldn't understand." Julian scoffed and revved his engine. "Enjoy the burgers. That is about all you can afford now." He sped off, thinking he had won the exchange. He didn't know that his time was up. The next morning, Marcus Vance sent a formal legal notice to Julian's office. It was brief and lethal. It stated that I accepted the divorce, but I required one final in-person meeting to clarify the division of assets. It was the invitation to his own execution, and he had no idea he was walking right into the trap. Julian swept into the cramped conference room like a king deigning to visit a peasant's hovel. The location was my idea. I had chosen a small, nondescript law office in a forgotten corner of the city, complete with flickering fluorescent lights and a carpet that had seen better decades. It was a calculated move designed to feed Julian's ego. I wanted him to feel superior, to believe that I was already sliding down the social ladder into obscurity. Bella was right beside him, acting less like a fiancé and more like a parole officer. She wrinkled her nose as she surveyed the peeling paint on the walls. "My God, Julian," Bella complained, her voice echoing in the small space. "Make this quick. The air in here feels contagious. I feel like I need a shower just standing in the doorway." I sat on the opposite side of the scratched laminate table, perfectly still. I was wearing a black suit that looked simple to the untrained eye, but the cut was razor sharp, tailored to fit me like armor, unlike the nervous, apologetic wife they expected. I met their gaze with a calm that bordered on boredom. Julian pulled out a chair for Bella, then threw a thick stack of documents onto the table. The papers slid across the surface and stopped inches from my hands. "Let us get this over with," Julian said, checking his watch. "These are the final waivers. You are signing away any future claim to Thorne Dynamics. I want a clean slate before the quarterly review. No complications. No desperate ex-wives coming back for a handout when the stock splits." He looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to crumble or beg. Instead, I just looked at the papers without touching them. Marcus Vance sat beside me. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and leaned forward, clasping his hands on top of his own file. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus began, his voice dangerously soft. "Before my client considers signing anything, I must ask, are you absolutely certain that you possess full ownership of the company in question?" Julian's face twisted in annoyance. He leaned over the table, invading my personal space. "Is this a joke?" Julian barked. "Of course I own it. It is my name on the building. I built Thorne Dynamics from the ground up in my garage while she was busy. I do not know. Dusting the furniture, I hold the patents. I own the factories. I am the only reason that company exists." "Actually," Bella interrupted, digging into her designer purse. She pulled out a thick white envelope and tossed it onto the table with a sneer. It landed with a dull thud next to the legal papers. "We knew you would try to drag this out to squeeze more cash out of him. You are so predictable. Sarah, here is $5,000. Consider it a tip for staying out of our way. Go buy yourself some decent clothes, or maybe a personality." I looked at the envelope. It was humiliating, degrading, and exactly the kind of gesture Bella thought constituted power. I did not reach for it. I did not even blink. "I do not need your money, Julian," I said, my voice steady and clear. "And I definitely do not need your pity. I only want to take back what truly belongs to me." Julian threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that filled the small room. "Belongs to you," he mocked, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Sarah, look at you. You have nothing. You are driving a rust bucket and living in a dump. The only thing you ever contributed to my success was making sure my coffee was hot. You are delusional if you think you are entitled to a single share of my empire." He stood up, buttoning his jacket with an air of finality. "Sign the papers by tomorrow, or I will bury you in legal fees so deep you will never see the sun again." Marcus Vance smiled then. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just heard the trap snap shut. He closed his folder with a deliberate, heavy sound. "We will not be signing anything today," Marcus said pleasantly. "But we look forward to seeing you in court. And, of course, at the emergency shareholder meeting next week. I hope you are still smiling then." "Mr. Thorne." Julian frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face for the first time, but he brushed it off as he guided Bella out of the room. He slammed the door behind him, leaving us in the silence of the shabby office. I looked at Marcus, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself a genuine smile. The trap was set. Now, all we had to do was wait for him to step on the trigger. The silence that followed our meeting in that shabby law office clearly unnerved Julian. For the first time, his arrogance was pierced by a sliver of doubt. I learned through my network that he had hired a private investigator the very next morning. He wanted to know how a woman he had discarded with $50,000 could afford a lawyer like Marcus Vance. However, the report he received was a collage of contradictions. My security team made sure of it. The investigator told Julian that while my public employment record was blank, my name seemed to trigger high-level security clearances at exclusive venues. It drove Julian mad. He was looking for dirt, but all he found was a mirror reflecting his own ignorance. Then came the first physical blow to his empire. On a Tuesday morning, the managers of his 3 primary manufacturing plants in Ohio received registered letters. The landlord, a faceless entity known as Obsidian Holdings, was declining to renew the commercial leases. They were given 30 days to vacate the premises. For a tech hardware company, moving an entire assembly line in 30 days was not just difficult, it was a death sentence. It meant halted production, missed delivery dates, and breach of contract penalties that would bleed him dry. I watched the fallout from my office. Julian spent 48 hours frantically trying to contact the owners of Obsidian Holdings. He screamed at secretaries and threatened lawsuits, but every road led to a dead end. Eventually, his lawyers traced the ownership structure back to its parent company Sterling Legacy. The realization must have been nauseating, but he still did not connect the name to his wife. To him, Sterling Legacy was just a faceless corporate monster eating him alive. While Julian was drowning, Bella was busy adding weights to his ankles. She stormed into his study while he was hyperventilating over a spreadsheet. "You promised me that diamond tennis bracelet for the gala," Bella whined, tossing a fashion magazine onto his desk. "And now your assistant tells me the account is frozen. This is embarrassing." "Julian, I have an image to maintain." "Not now." "Bella," Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "I am about to lose the factories. If we do not fix this, there will be no gala, let alone a bracelet." "Well, fix it." Then she snapped back. "That is your job. Just do not expect me to stick around if you are going to be poor and stressed all the time. I need a man who can handle his business, not one who cries about rent." She stormed out, leaving him alone with his crumbling kingdom. While she was demanding jewelry, I was making my next move. I quietly instructed Marcus to approach the smaller regional banks that held Julian's short-term debt. They were already nervous about the rumors surrounding Thorne Dynamics. When I offered to buy out the loans at 90 cents on the dollar, they practically tripped over themselves to sign. By Friday afternoon, I was no longer just his ex-wife. I was his largest creditor. But the most dangerous moment of the week did not happen in a boardroom. It happened in a small coffee shop with Liam. We were sitting by the window, watching the rain, when Liam picked up a copy of Forbes that someone had left on the table. The cover featured a silhouette of a woman standing in a high-rise office, her face turned away from the camera, looking out over New York. The headline read, "The Shadow Titan, the trillion-dollar woman nobody knows." Liam stared at the photo, then looked at me. He looked back at the photo, specifically at the way the woman held her hands, a unique habit I had of clasping my right wrist with my left hand when I was thinking. "Sarah," Liam said slowly, his voice dropping to a hush. "This woman, the posture, it looks exactly like you." My heart skipped a beat. I had been so careful. "It is just a generic photo. Liam," I tried to deflect. He shook his head, his eyes searching mine. "No, I know you. I know how you stand. And I know that you are smarter than you let on. You are not just a housewife starting over. Are you?" I looked at him, terrified that I would see the same greed that had consumed Julian. But there was no dollar sign in his eyes, only confusion and concern. "No," I admitted softly. "I am not. It is complicated. Liam, there is a lot I haven't told you because I needed to be sure." Liam reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "I do not care about the money, Sarah. I really don't. But looking at that photo, that woman looks lonely, and she looks like she is carrying the weight of the world. I just want to make sure you are okay." I felt a lump form in my throat. He was worried about my stress, not calculating my net worth. "I am okay," I whispered. "Better than I have been in a long time." The moment was broken by a notification on my phone. Marcus had sent the final salvo. Across town, a courier was walking into Thorne Dynamics. Julian was in the middle of a screaming match with his CFO when the receptionist handed him a thick envelope. He tore it open, his hands shaking. It was a formal summons. A group of newly organized majority shareholders had called for an emergency meeting to discuss the immediate restructuring of the company's leadership. Julian stared at the paper, the blood draining from his face. He didn't know who these shareholders were, but he knew one thing: the wolves were not just at the door anymore. They were inside the house. The collapse of Julian's empire did not happen in a whisper. It happened with the violent shriek of a stock ticker plummeting towards zero. By Wednesday morning, shares of Thorne Dynamics had nosedived 40%. The rumors of the factory evictions had leaked to the press, and the wolves of Wall Street were tearing his company apart piece by piece. Julian scrambled to stop the bleeding. He sold the yacht he had bought only days ago, along with 2 of his Italian sports cars, just to maintain enough cash flow to keep the lights on. He told Bella it was all part of a plan. "I am just making room for the newer models." "Babe," Julian lied, his smile tight and sweaty. "Next month's release is going to be spectacular. You will see." But lies have a short shelf life. Bella found out the truth later that afternoon at an exclusive day spa in Manhattan. She had just finished a mud wrap and a massage when she tried to pay for a $1,000 skin treatment. The card did not just decline. The receptionist informed her, loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear, that the account had been permanently frozen by the bank. Bella stormed home, her face flushed not from the facial, but from pure rage. She threw the useless plastic at Julian's chest the moment he walked through the door. "You liar," Bella screamed. "The card is dead. The yacht is gone. You are broke, aren't you? You dragged me into this mess. It is just a liquidity issue," Julian shouted back, trying to grab her arm. "Calm down. Once the Sterling deal goes through, there is no deal." Bella shrieked, pulling away. I checked the news. "Julian, your stock is garbage. Listen to me carefully. If you do not fix this by tomorrow, I am gone, and I will sell every secret I know about you to the tabloids to fund my plane ticket. I did not sign up to be the wife of a failure." Desperation turned Julian into a madman. He needed a lifeline, and his mind, distorted by panic, went back to the only person who had ever saved him before. He drove to the rundown apartment complex where he had banished me, convinced he could bully me into helping him one last time. He pounded on the door of apartment 4B. A stranger opened the door, a large man in a stained undershirt. "What do you want?" the man grunted. "Where is Serafina?" Julian demanded, looking past him. "Tell her to come out." "Nobody named Serafina lives here," the man said, slamming the door in his face. "She moved out weeks ago. Get lost." Julian stood in the hallway, confused and trembling. He pulled out his phone and dialed my number. I was sitting in my penthouse, Marcus Vance on my right and Liam on my left. I placed the phone on the table and hit the speaker button. Sarah Julian's voice came through, breathless and shaky. He had dropped the arrogance. He sounded small. "Sarah, listen to me. I know things ended badly, but we are still technically married on paper. I need you to co-sign a loan. Just a formality. I will give you $10,000 cash. That is a lot of money for you. It changes your life." I looked at Liam. He shook his head, a look of disgust on his face. Marcus just smirked, checking his watch. "I do not want your money." "Julian," I said, my voice ice cold. "Don't be stupid," Julian snapped, his panic bleeding through. "You are waiting tables or scrubbing floors, aren't you? You need this. Just sign the damn paper. I am not scrubbing floors." "Julian," I replied. "And as for the paper, I will see you in the boardroom tomorrow morning." I hung up before he could respond. That night, the eve of his judgment, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, The city lights of New York glittered below like spilled diamonds. I felt a profound sense of peace. The play was over. The curtain was about to fall. Across the city, Julian was unraveling. He paced the floors of his empty mansion, a bottle of expensive whiskey in his hand. He smashed a Ming vase against the wall, the sound of shattering porcelain echoing through the empty halls. He was terrified. The name Sterling Legacy kept looping in his mind, a faceless monster that had swallowed his factories and his debt. He had no idea the monster had been sleeping in his bed for 7 years. When the sun rose, Julian splashed cold water on his face. He put on his most expensive suit, tied his tie with trembling hands, and looked in the mirror. "You are Julian Thorne," he whispered to his reflection, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "You can talk your way out of anything. You just need to charm them. One last time." He walked out the door, marching toward the slaughter, believing he was still the king. The boardroom of Thorne Dynamics was a shark tank, and the water was thick with blood. Every seat at the long mahogany table was occupied by grim-faced shareholders and aggressive lawyers. The air conditioning was humming on high, yet the room felt stiflingly hot. At the head of the table, Julian stood with sweat beading on his forehead, his hands gripping the lectern as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Gentlemen, please, listen to me," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. "These rumors about the factory leases are just negotiation tactics. I have everything under control. The stock dip is temporary. I am Julian Thorne. I built this company from nothing. You have to trust my vision. Your vision has cost us 40% of our portfolio in 3 days. One of the investors snapped. "We are not interested in speeches. Thorne, we are interested in the majority creditor who summoned us here. Where are they?" As if on cue, the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. The room fell silent. Julian looked up, expecting to see a team of elderly bankers. Instead, he saw me. I walked into the room wearing a tailored white suit that cost more than his car. My hair was pulled back in a sleek, sharp style, and my heels clicked against the floor with a rhythm that sounded like a war drum. I was no longer the invisible housewife who blended into the wallpaper. I was the storm he never saw coming. Julian froze, his mouth hanging open. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear a hallucination. "Sarah," he stammered, his face flushing red. What are you doing here? This is a closed meeting, security. Get this woman out of here right now." He pointed a shaking finger at the door, but the security guards did not move. They were looking at me, or rather, at the man walking a step behind me. Marcus Vance stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate respect. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice booming across the room. "You do not give orders here anymore." "Excuse me," Julian shouted, looking around wildly. "I am the CEO." "Who do you think you are?" Marcus adjusted his tie and gestured toward me with an open hand. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce the representative of the new majority ownership group. This is Ms. Serafina Sterling. She is the chairwoman of Sterling Legacy. And as of this morning, her holding company owns 60% of your debt, the land under your factories, and the controlling interest in your patents." The name hit Julian like a physical blow. He staggered back, his legs hitting his chair, and collapsed into it. Sterling, Julian whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. "But that is the company that destroyed me. Sarah, you are..." Sterling. I walked to the head of the table, standing directly beside him. I looked down at the man who had tossed me aside like garbage only a week ago. "I did not just destroy you, Julian," I said, my voice calm and projecting to every corner of the room. "I made you." I signaled to the tech assistant, who immediately pulled up a slide on the main projection screen. It showed a complex web of financial transactions dating back 7 years. 7 years ago, You received a seed investment of $200,000 from a venture capital firm called Phoenix Ventures, I explained, pointing to the screen. You thought they were just lucky believers. They were a shell company I created. I funded your startup. And those big contracts with Orion and Zenith, I authorized those personally. I used my influence to open doors that would have remained locked to you forever. The shareholders began murmuring, looking from the screen to Julian with growing hostility. I built your throne for love. Julian, I said, locking eyes with him. I stayed in the shadows so you could shine. But you mistook my support for weakness. You thought you were a king, but you were just a man standing on a pedestal I built. And now, I am dismantling it, brick by brick, because of your betrayal. This is insane, Julian cried out, looking at the board members. She is lying. She is just a vindictive ex-wife. You cannot listen to her. We have seen the paperwork. Julian, the lead investor said coldly. I move for a vote of no confidence, effective immediately. Seconded. Another voice rang out. Motion passed. The investor said, You are fired. Mr. Thorne, please vacate the premises. Before Julian could process his termination, the doors burst open again. Bella rushed in, wearing a dress that was far too short for a corporate setting. She looked frantic. Julian had called her earlier, begging her to come and show support, to be the trophy on his arm that proved he was still a winner. Julian, Bella shouted, running to his side. The doorman tried to stop me. Tell them who I am. Julian looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears. Bella, baby, they took it. They took everything. The company. The money. It is all gone. Bella stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at the hostile faces of the board, then at me, standing tall and victorious, and finally at Julian, who was slumped in his chair like a broken doll. Gone, Bella shrieked. What do you mean, gone? You are broke. We can rebuild, Julian pleaded, reaching for her hand. I just need you to stand by me. Bella slapped his hand away as if it were covered in acid. Stand by you. She laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. I am not standing by a loser. You told me you were rich. You told me she was the problem. You are nothing but a fraud. She turned on her heel and marched toward the door, not even glancing back as Julian called her name. The room was silent, save for the hum of the projector fan. I looked down at my ex-husband, who sat alone in the ruins of his own ego, and felt absolutely nothing. The crushing was complete. By the time the sun set that evening, Julian was a king without a kingdom. The bank had already moved to foreclose on the Malibu villa. His personal accounts were seized to cover the margin calls, and his reputation was in tatters. He had walked into that building as a millionaire mogul and was leaving it with nothing but the suit on his back and a debt he could never repay. Even Bella, his prize for success, had vanished the moment the credit cards stopped working. I walked toward the private elevator, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. I heard frantic footsteps behind me, followed by a desperate cry that echoed through the lobby. Sarah, wait, please. Just wait. I stopped and turned slowly. Julian was running toward me, his tie undone, his hair a mess. He ignored the shocked stares of the employees he used to terrorize. He threw himself at my feet, his knees hitting the floor with a heavy thud. He reached out to grab the hem of my skirt, his hands shaking violently. Sarah, please. Do not do this, Julian sobbed, tears streaming down his face. Think about us. Think about the garage. Remember when we shared that frozen pizza on our first anniversary? We were happy then. I can be that man again. I promise. I will change. Just give me one chance. Do not leave me like this. I looked down at him. I expected to feel a surge of triumph or perhaps a flare of anger, but as I watched him weep, begging for salvation from the woman he had called a burden only days ago, I felt nothing but a profound, quiet pity. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He was not a monster. He was just a fool who had traded a diamond for a handful of glass. "Get up, Julian," I said softly. "You will help me," he asked, hope sparking in his wet eyes. "We can start over. Just you and me." I shook my head, my expression unmoving. "The man I loved died the moment you chose betrayal," I told him, my voice steady and final. "You are not him. You are just a hollow shell of greed. And I do not finance empty shells." I turned my back on him and stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, two burly security guards men Julian had hired himself hoisted him up by his arms. He screamed my name, kicking and struggling, but they dragged him toward the revolving doors. Outside, a swarm of paparazzi was waiting. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning, capturing every second of his humiliation. The photos of Julian Thorne being thrown out of his own headquarters would be on the front page of every tabloid by morning. Bella did not escape the fallout either. The media turned on her with vicious speed. Stories surfaced about her lavish spending and her swift abandonment of Julian the moment the money ran out. She was branded a gold digger. Her modeling contracts were canceled one by one, and she became a pariah in the social circles she had tried so hard to infiltrate. In the weeks that followed, I went to work. I did not dismantle the company. I purified it. I fired the sycophants Julian had hired and promoted the hard-working engineers he had ignored. I renamed the corporation Phoenix Innovations, a symbol of rising from the ashes. I used the first quarter profits to establish the Second Chance Fund, a non-profit organization dedicated to funding female entrepreneurs who had been financially abused or underestimated by their partners. Julian, meanwhile, found his own level. Stripped of his assets and blacklisted from every boardroom in the city, he was forced to move into a cramped, mildewed studio apartment on the edge of town, far worse than the one he had tried to banish me to. One rainy Tuesday, I saw him. I was stopped at a red light in my chauffeured car, looking out the window. Julian was on a bicycle, wearing a rain poncho that was too big for him, a thermal food delivery bag strapped to his back. He looked exhausted, his face gaunt and aged by stress. He stopped his bike next to a newsstand. On the rack, strictly by coincidence, was a business magazine with my face on the cover. The headline read, "Serafina Sterling, the Queen of the New Era." Julian stared at the magazine. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the glossy cover, rainwater dripping from his nose. I saw his lips move, whispering something to the image of the wife he had thrown away. He looked up, and for a split second, our eyes met through the tinted glass of my car. He froze, shame washing over him, and quickly looked away, pedaling hard into the rain to deliver a $10 meal to someone who could afford it. My revenge was not a cage or a beating. It was letting him live. It was forcing him to wake up every single morning in a bed he bought with minimum wage, knowing that he once held the world in his hands and dropped it because he wanted to chase a shiny object. That regret was a prison stronger than any bars I could have built. It had been exactly 365 days since I walked out of that boardroom, leaving Julian in the wreckage of his own making. I stood on the balcony of the new Sterling Community Library, breathing in the scent of jasmine and old books. This building was not a monument to my ego. It was a sanctuary for the neighborhood, funded entirely by the profits of my reorganized company. I no longer hid who I was. The world knew Serafina Sterling now, not as a shadow investor or a trodden-down housewife, but as a woman who used her power to build foundations rather than facades. I lived simply, driving a practical car and wearing clothes that felt like me, but I walked with a spine of steel. The respect I saw in the eyes of my staff and neighbors was not because of the zeros in my bank account, but because I actually listened when they spoke. A warm hand touched my shoulder, breaking my reverie. I turned to see Liam. He was wearing a simple linen suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He knew everything now, the money, the deception, the scars. He had not run away, nor had he asked for a cent. He simply held space for me to heal. "You did it," Liam said softly, looking out over the courtyard below where children were reading on the grass. You turned the pain into something beautiful. We did it, I corrected him. I could not have done the design without your sketches. Liam turned me to face him, his expression shifting into something deeper, more intense. He reached into his pocket, but he did not pull out a velvet box from a high-end jeweler. He pulled out a small, hand-carved wooden box. Inside sat a ring. It was not a massive, gaudy diamond like the one Julian had bought for Bella. It was a band of rose gold, twisted to look like two vines growing together, holding a small, rare sapphire that looked like a drop of deep ocean water. It is a phoenix design, Liam whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Because you rose from the ashes. Sarah, I do not want to own you. I just want to grow beside you. Will you marry me? Tears pricked my eyes, hot and real. Yes, I said, my voice trembling. Yes, 1,000 times. Our wedding took place 2 months later in the library garden. It was small, intimate, and private. There were no press helicopters, no live streams, and no trying to impress people we did not like. Just 50 of our closest friends, good food, and laughter that rang true. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the celebration, a delivery bicycle slowed to a halt on the street outside the iron gates. The rider was wearing a faded neon vest, a heavy thermal bag strapped to his back. It was Julian. He had a delivery for the building next door, but the sound of music had made him stop. He gripped the handlebars of his bike, his knuckles rough and chapped from manual labor. Through the gaps in the ivy-covered fence, he saw me. I was laughing, my head thrown back, dancing with Liam under a string of fairy lights. I looked radiant, freer than I had ever been in the penthouse or the villa. Julian felt a hot tear slide down his dirt-streaked cheek. He realized then that the woman dancing in the garden was the same woman who used to make his coffee and listen to his dreams in a garage. He had held a miracle in his hands and traded it for a mirage. I am sorry, Julian whispered to the air, his voice breaking. I happened to glance toward the gate at that moment. I saw the silhouette of a man on a bicycle, a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to a stranger. I did not feel anger. I did not feel triumph. I simply felt finished. I turned my back on the gate, tightened my grip on Liam's hand, and stepped deeper into the music. Julian wiped his face, pushed off the curb, and pedaled away into the twilight, carrying the weight of his choices with him. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table and signed a document transferring another $10 million to my foundation for women starting over. Money was a powerful tool, but it was a terrible master. I had learned that my value did not come from what I owned, but from what I was willing to walk away from to find myself. I looked at the ring on my finger and smiled. The best revenge was not destroying Julian. It was living a life so full, so vibrant, and so happy that his memory simply faded away, like a bad dream at sunrise. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with our community. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and resilience, please make sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story heard by even more people.